Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Sherry Fraser, the Provost here at Concordia College, and I had for 20 years the distinct honor and privilege of working with Dr. David Jacobson, for whom this lecture series is named. David was professor of philosophy and became Concordia's first provost in 2000. He was a cherished member of the faculty and challenged all of us, faculty, students, and staff, to think beyond boundaries, to be thoughtful in our actions, and to see the world as our classroom. He was an amazing colleague. He dedicated service to Concordia, which ended in his untimely death in 2004. This lecture series continues to remind us of his desire to continue educating long after he was here with us. I also have the distinct privilege and honor to introduce Catherine Jacobson, David's widow, who's with us. And I asked Dr. Lisa Decker to come forward to introduce our speaker this evening and get things rolling.
Good evening, everyone. It is both a privilege and an honor to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Napoleon Peoples. I first met Dr. Peoples when I was a college student in Richmond, Virginia. Dr. Peoples was the director of the University Office of Multicultural Student Affairs at the time and was doing amazing things on campus. We did some work together, became friends, and have a friendship that has spanned many years and many miles. Dr. Peoples went on to become the Associate Dean of Student Affairs at VCU's Medical College. As a member of the Student Affairs leadership team, he worked tirelessly to provide quality, student-focused, forward-thinking programs and services for the students at the university. He met with our student life team this afternoon, I'm proud to say, and shared stories and ideas and made some suggestions of things that we can try here at Concordia. Napoleon recently retired after 45 years of service at Virginia Commonwealth University. Yes, he was 5 when he started working there. He has been a change agent, an advocate, a spokesperson, and a friend to many. I don't think I've ever met anyone who enjoyed life as much as Dr. Peoples. He is one of my heroes. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Dr. Napoleon Peoples, who is here to talk tonight on the reform and revolution of the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Decker, and thank all of you who came out tonight to this presentation. Ms. Jacobson, thank you for coming out. It is really an honor to be here and to just experience this marvelous college. I had a chance today to just go around and meet with a lot of people, and it really warmed my heart and let me know why I'm really here. I mean, you have a wonderful school here. This conversation on the reform and revolution of the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. is very, very important. Tonight I will highlight some significant moments of the reform and revolution of Dr. King. I will show you how he was able to effectively move his agenda using the tactic of nonviolent direct action, or as he described, creating nonviolent tension. Dr. King once said, direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. But before I begin, I like to tell stories, and I'm going to tell you a story. During the segregation era, a little boy and his aunt left Chester, Pennsylvania, going to Birmingham, Alabama. When they arrived at Richmond, Virginia, to pick up passengers, the little boy was sort of like antsy and moving around, and he said, "I need to go to the bathroom." And the bus driver said, "I don't think that's a good idea." The little boy said, "I have to go to the bathroom." The bus driver opened the door. The little boy exited the bus. And as he was entering the facility, a white man came through and opened the door and hit him in his head. The little boy, being upset, wanted to know why this happened, because the little boy had not experienced that in his early life. He grew up in Chester, Pennsylvania, where Crozier Theological Seminary is located, where Dr. King went to school. And that community was more a blue-collar, immigrant-type environment where people got along rather well. So the little boy hadn't experienced that. So he wanted to find out what was wrong. So as he walked toward the man to ask him, someone grabbed his arm and said, "The bathroom is over there." And the little boy turned and looked and said, "Okay." He went to the bathroom. When he came out, he was thirsty. And he looked around and he said, "I need a water fountain." He looked over at the water fountain, and the fountain, one fountain had on it white only, and the other fountain had colored. Little boy, absolutely confused. There's a white fountain, this white only fountain, does it have clear water? Colored fountain, is it purple water? What's the deal? So the little boy is standing there, he said, "I can't," he was really surprised and really couldn't figure out what was going on. So he went back to the bus. And when he got to the bus, he asked his aunt, "I'm confused. What is this about this white only and colored?" And his aunt said, "It's about racism, and I'll tell you about it one day." This response was even more confusing to the little boy. As they continued on the trip, the little boy began to notice more and more negative behavior toward him by white people, and saw more and more signs of white only and colored. And you know what? This little boy that I'm talking about was me. I had an experience that was so traumatizing at that point, I didn't understand what was going on, because I was trying to figure out how and why this was happening. The little boy, me, soon realized that this was a situation that was totally confusing. And even today, I find it equally as confusing to see some of the stuff that's going on, even after what Martin Luther King did. And that's why I chose to share that story tonight and talk about reform and revolution. I want you to think about, for a moment, what it was like for me going into the South as a child. Although many innocent black children were psychologically wounded by overt discrimination, white children were too. While fear and powerlessness was being learned by one group of children, the other group learned an attitude of superiority. These differences helped to maintain negative attitudes and strengthen the segregated and discriminatory practices in the South. I ask you to think about, how would you have felt or reacted if you were treated like that at a bus station? What would you have thought, and what would you have felt? Imagine just for a moment if you had to sit in a special section of Delta Airlines that was designated for people who are different than you. Or what would it be like if you had to go to the Holiday Inn and you couldn't sleep at the Holiday Inn because of your race? In the South during that time, black people, African Americans, generally would have multiple drivers because they could not stop for fear of being hurt or turned away from a public facility. This was a reality during the King era when racism and segregation were rampant. And this injustice is what Dr. Martin Luther King fought so passionately to eradicate. Dr. King was aware of the power of bigotry and systematic racism and how raising children in a racist society would continue the process. He wanted to create a wholesome avenue for change, especially for children. In his I Have a Dream speech, he stated, "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will be not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Yet, as he tried to change the social and political climate, there are 3 words that were close by that kept him focused. These 3 words were a powerful part of the civil rights movement. Those words were, "We shall overcome." We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my soul, we shall overcome someday. These 3 words were sung throughout the South during the Civil Rights era. These 3 words, even today, have become a battle cry for justice. These 3 words, "we shall overcome," kept the spirit of the civil rights workers high and focused on their goals. The battle cry for justice also galvanized and supported the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We shall overcome. Dr. King grew up in segregated Atlanta. He had 2 parents. One was a minister. He attended it historically, and as they say today, HBCU, Morehouse College, and then enrolled in predominantly white Crozier Theological Seminary, as I said, was located in Chester, Pennsylvania. And upon graduating, he enrolled in Boston University and graduated with a degree in systematic theology. However, it was his experience at Crozier that helped him the most. Crozier maintained an unorthodox liberal atmosphere. They promoted forgiveness and racial harmony whenever tensions arose. Yet, young Dr. King believed that love and reason could bring out in all people a basic goodness. And he said that it was deeper than racial harmony. These concepts of love and reason can be seen throughout his life. Dr. King was mentored by 2 professors, and through those professors, he learned, 1, the pressing questions of public morality, and the second, he learned about Gandhi. He liked the teachings of Gandhi so much that he later went to India to study the teachings more. The Crozier experience armed Dr. King with a greater understanding of race and human relations, sharpened his homiletic skills, and strengthened his oratorical gift. After graduating in 1954, the same year that the Supreme Court settled Brown v. Board of Education and banned segregation in public schools, he was hired as pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Dexter was a traditionally middle-class, Southern Black Baptist church with strong leadership ties to the community. I contend, this is just my belief, that becoming the pastor of Dexter was more divine intervention than by chance. His first challenge was to reform the church. So he established social and political action committees. He created fundraising efforts for college scholarships. He promoted membership in the NAACP, and he required that every member must be a registered voter. These changes assisted him in what he was about to experience in Montgomery and beyond. Shortly after arriving at Dexter Avenue, a major issue arose, and it arose in December 1955. Rosa Parks got on the bus, sitting down. Bus driver told her, "You have to move because we have another passenger, white passenger, that needs your seat." Rosa Parks refused to stand up and give up her seat, which was a violation of the law. Today we know that Rosa Parks, as the mother of civil rights movement, and many times her name is synonymous with Dr. King's. However, she was not the first to be arrested. There were 3 incidents that year. There were 2 other black women who were arrested: Claudette Colvin and Mary Louise Smith. A lot of people don't know about this because it didn't go anywhere, and it wasn't a rallying point around these women to be arrested because they didn't have community leverage, which is sad. Rosa Parks was different. She was a respected member of the community and a member of the NAACP. People really liked Rosa Parks. So after her arrest, leaders, the NAACP, and members of the Dexter Avenue Political Affairs Committee expressed interest in having a bus boycott to protest the arrest of Rosa Parks. It was decided that Dr. King, the new pastor of Dexter, mind you, and president of the Montgomery Improvement Association would direct the boycott. Dr. King's goal was to use nonviolent direct action in terms of boycott to reform the discriminatory practices of the bus system and the local laws. As I said earlier, Dr. King was great. He had great oratorical skills. And after he spoke to the people, he got the whole community involved in this action. It was so powerful. This was so powerful. These are some things that happened. To demonstrate the passion and resolve and commitment of the protesters, it was reported that one elderly woman said, if her feet gave out, she would crawl on her knees before riding the buses. There was another woman who said, my feet is tired, but my soul is rested. It should be noted that the boycott was indirectly supported by even some powerful white Montgomery people who didn't want to be identified. What would happen is this. Some white women would give a few dollars to their maid and say, don't you tell my husband. And later that evening, the husband would come home and give a few dollars and tell, don't you tell my wife. In other instances, the maids were being picked up by these women, and when challenged, they would say, oh, I'm just picking them up because I don't want them to be harmed by those rabble-rousers out there who are going around attacking people. So there were people who would not speak out, who felt that they were doing something that was, I guess, positive. The boycott was effective because it had a negative financial effect on the local community. However, a major issue almost derailed the nonviolent boycott campaign. Dr. King's home was bombed. And when it was bombed, angry black men picked up arms and wanted to go out and become violent. They had weapons. They wanted to retaliate. However, once again, through his oratorical skills and calm demeanor, Dr. King was able to get them to calm down and focus on the goal. The bombing also caused internal conflict amongst black leaders, but Dr. King was also able to work through this too by sharing his perception of their role. Dr. King told them that the function of the boycott leaders was 1, to inspire, 2, to react, and 3, to preserve. In February of 1956, the Montgomery Improvement Association filed a lawsuit in federal court asking for an injunction against segregated bus seating practices, and they won. The Montgomery buses were ordered to desegregate, but city officials appealed the decision to the Supreme Court. In November 1956, the Supreme Court upheld the decision. Finally, after 381 days of boycotting, Dr. King and black community leaders had changed the way in which blacks were treated on public transportation in Montgomery. This was Dr. King's first successful reform during the Civil Rights Movement. 2 years later, he would write about the bus boycott in his book, Stride to Freedom. In 1957, Dr. King worked with a group of ministers and churches and founded SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, for the purpose of challenging and reforming, which is important, reforming racist systems throughout the South. He planned to use nonviolent direct action protests, boycotts, and marches. The group worked closely with the NAACP, and the reason they worked with the NAACP because their focus was more on legal efforts to eradicate segregation through the courts. Dr. King and SCLC gained national attention in their first protest campaign in Albany, Georgia. However, it changed nothing. It changed nothing. A similar protest was planned in Birmingham, Alabama in the spring of 1963 to focus on anti-segregation in the city. It was called the Birmingham Campaign and was to be led by Reverend Fred Shuttleworth, a local leader and member of SCLC. On Good Friday, 1963, Dr. King and Reverend Ralph Abernathy were jailed in Birmingham because they violated an emergency anti-protest injunction signed by Judge William A. Jenkins that said no one was to march in Birmingham. Guess what? Dr. King said this was unconstitutional. And guess what? He marched anyway. And guess what? He was arrested. While incarcerated, Dr. King became disheartened after reading how negatively he was being perceived through the media. And incidentally, this was very difficult. You need to know this. Dr. King, newspapers were being smuggled into the jail so he could read because he couldn't get, they had sort of isolated him so he couldn't get to newspapers, so he got these newspapers. People on the outside were saying that he was causing problems for them. The local news media was optimistic about what they thought the mayor would do. Even northern newspapers and the white liberal Birmingham clergy didn't view Dr. King's actions positively. But it was a lack of support from clergy that prompted him to write that letter. You understand? It's from the clergy. In it, Dr. King addressed concerns of Christian and Jewish religious leaders who criticized him for his, 1, unwise and untimely involvement, and because he's an outsider. If you get a chance to read that letter, please do after we finish. It's interesting. So Dr. King, what he did, he addressed them. He highlighted his mission to reform unjust laws in Birmingham through the Act of Nonviolent Direct Action. He went on to say that he was invited there by SCLC affiliate, and that he would not sit in Atlanta and not be concerned about Birmingham too. He further said, this is what is more common, people know about, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly, affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with a narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its boundaries. Through this letter, Dr. King was setting the stage for a move to more human rights for all. He pointed out the purpose of direct action by saying, it is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. And people have a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. After approximately 9 days, Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy were bonded out of jail. Shortly thereafter, another mass march was planned. After all had failed, and as a last strategy, Dr. King said he would commit his cause to the witness of school children. In his next march, he did just that. To assist with the lack of adult volunteers due to SCLC not having sufficient funds for bail, Dr. King recruited and used teenagers and school-aged children in what is called the Children's Crusade. A strategy was used whereby each group, and they were taught about nonviolent tactics, but each group would go out on a daily basis and protest. The first group went out, and they were arrested. Another group went out, and they were arrested. And on the second day, Eugene Bull Connor, Director of Public Safety, ordered his police to attack the marchers using batons and attack dogs. And his firefighters used high-pressure hoses. All these images were captured on TV and in newspapers around the country. Even so, even with all this, the kids continued to march. Finally, on May 10th, it was decided by local leaders that they needed to negotiate. And they did. An agreement between the black leaders and the business community was reached to move the city toward desegregation. Then on the 23rd of May, the Alabama Supreme Court ordered Bull Connors to vacate his office. Through his efforts, and with the help of SCLC, Dr. King gained national prominence, and the SCLC gained a major role in the civil rights movement. Another movement for change was the March on Washington. The planning for the March on Washington was a collaboration between several organizations. I'll name a few. SCLC, NAACP, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, et cetera, et cetera. They wanted to highlight the need for jobs and civil rights for Black Americans and to show that in a unified fashion, they felt the current conditions needed to be addressed. There were about 250 civil rights supporters at that event. The I Have a Dream speech that Dr. King delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial was thought to be one of the most powerful speeches in his life and a major moment during civil rights. In his speech, he addressed equal rights and what he wanted for America. Dr. King said this: no, we're not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. The March on Washington and Dr. King's eloquent speech, this is really important. The march and the speech contributed to reforming the national presence on civil rights and setting the stage for the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act was a major piece of legislation that changed the ways blacks and others are treated in terms of their civil rights. During the same year the Civil Rights Act was passed, Dr. King wrote another book, Why We Can't Wait. Dr. King and SCLC planned another march. This is a marching guy. They like to march. To highlight the inequalities in voter registration and need for equal voting rights for black citizens, and to reform the current process in Alabama. The march was to begin in Sommer and end in the capital of Montgomery, Alabama, where they would present a petition to Governor George A. Wallace. A group of 600 people were crossing the Edward Pettus Bridge in Selma when they were stopped. And they were stopped by the Alabama State Police and told that they had to disband. They said, we're not going to disband. So they were attacked again, beaten with nightsticks, whips, tear gas, kicked, and then thrown in prison. Once again, this was televised. And after the event, newspapers across the country began to show pictures of this brutality, and it began to be called Bloody Sunday. The marchers they wanted to march again on March 9th. And what happened? They were stopped. This time there was no violence, they were just stopped. They couldn't go any further. So SCLC filed a petition for the march, and President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed a federal court order giving them the right to march and to protest. The order stopped the police from interfering with the next march, and then on more than 2,000 civil rights advocates marched, being protected by the U.S. Army and the Alabama National Guard. They completed the march in Montgomery, where Dr. King addressed a rally of 20,000 civil rights workers. And this march helped the country to focus on unequal voting practices and supported the creation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that Lyndon Baines Johnson signed. You know, it's an interesting thing because at this point, history takes a little turn. Because after the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, Dr. King continued his action, but the climate was shifting. This is when the climate began to shift. Black leaders and other organizations were beginning to question Dr. King's motives and his relevancy. Younger black activists were out there looking at him and saying his nonviolent tactics were not enough. His statement about Vietnam War was being attacked and caused him to lose lots of Northern supporters. So Dr. King was having a tough time around this point. But in light of all this shift in history, he looked at it and he said, I need to shift just a little bit, and I will. His interest moved from the South solely to looking at racial injustices in northern cities, especially with discrimination in housing and employment. It appeared that he was in the beginning stages of reforming his position from civil rights to human rights. Approximately 1 year before his death in 1968, Dr. King began to discuss moving from civil rights to human rights. He believed that there needed to be a radical redistribution of wealth and power, a radical redistribution of wealth and power. Consistent with this view, Dr. King delivered these words to his staff in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference retreat in May 1967. And this is what he said: "I think it is necessary for us to realize that we have moved from the era of civil rights to the era of human rights. When we see that there must be a radical distribution of economic and political power, then we see that for the last 12 years, we have been in a reform movement that after Selma and the Voting Rights Bill, we moved into a new era, which must be an era of revolution. In short, we have moved into an era where we are called upon to raise certain basic questions about the whole society." Later, he began talking about bringing poor people together from across the country to participate in another march, a crusade on Washington to demand better jobs, homes, and education. This idea would soon become called the Poor People's Campaign. And as the Reverend Ralph Abernathy said, the purpose of this campaign would be to dramatize the plight of Americans poor of all races and make very clear that they are sick and tired of waiting for better life. So, in 1967, Dr. King and others planned a Poor People's Campaign to reform the economic conditions of America. He wanted to force economic justice by having poor people come together to put pressure on the federal government. During that year, many of his speeches alluded to poverty as a global issue. Now he's going global. That's a global issue. Unfortunately, on April 4th, 1968, before he could participate, Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee by sniper James Earl Ray. Dr. King was there to support the economic rights of striking black garbage workers. Yet, in spite of this, the Poor People's Campaign took place anyway on April 29th, 1968. So as you've just seen, Dr. King was much more than his "I Have a Dream" speech, for which he is most known. He's more powerful than that. By examining his early experiences, we can see how those forces shaped and influenced his reform efforts in the civil rights movement, as well as his move toward a more revolutionary agenda of universal rights. Early in his career, Dr. King, with the assistance of many others, focused on attempting to reform Southern laws that maintain segregated transportation practices, unfair voting rights, segregated housing, and all these things that created a second-class citizenship. At the end of his career, he shifted his focus to a more global economic rights and jobs for poor people. At the same time of his death, he seemed to be moving toward human rights. He wanted to create a society where all people had an opportunity to live and prosper together in a fair and just society where love trumped hate. He believed that at the center of nonviolence stands the principle of love. This is the love that he interpreted as understanding and goodwill. So he called love understanding and goodwill. That was his interpretation of love. Today, Dr. King's words still live on. His vision for the future is a beacon for hope, a beacon for wholesome human existence. His vision and words continue to be studied by scholars all over the world. Even so, we're now living in a time when racism and other forms of hate are surfacing again. And although some of it is blatant, much of it is so subtle, hidden in politics and procedures and how we deal with each other. Some scholars call it a more modern form of ism. One example is to look at our deeply flawed or broken criminal justice system. I ask you to reflect on your life in the context of what Dr. King tried to create in America. Reflect on your life and what he tried to accomplish in America. What are you doing to make this world better for others? What is your goal at Concordia in terms of being a change agent through reform and revolution? What are you doing in this community to make change? Maybe not in the community, but outside the community. And with that in mind, I invite you to set one goal that will make a difference in others' lives. Remember, Dr. King left us with a blueprint for change, and it begins with us. The Bible also gives us a prescription of love thy neighbor as thyself. The Bible gives us that. So, how will love show up in your life? This human quality is what Dr. King saw. And I say to you, we shall overcome. Thank you. Now, if there are questions, I want to take your questions if you have them. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Could you comment a little bit about some of the things that are happening now?
Oh, sir. You know, yeah, I can. There's so many things happening now. I mean, our justice.
Like the redistricting, where people are segregated into certain areas where they're
Yes.
minimized.
That's happening. Gentrification is taking place. I contend, you know, I see people going into these traditionally African American communities and reshaping them and changing them, and I wonder what's happening to all the people who've been living there. They're being pushed up. Many of them have homes, and how can they afford to move to another area at their age? You know, so that's part of it. The other thing is criminal justice system. You just look at the newspapers, what's going on around the country in terms of incarcerations. Incarcerations are up, particularly for people of color throughout this country. If you look at just the poverty alone, and look at what's going on. I'm not going to get into the political climate right now because it's changing, but there's so many little things, the subtleties. If you just look at, and I have to say it, but if you look at the past president, the things that were trying to be put in place, some of those things are being dismantled. I don't know why. I mean, I have a feeling, I'm not a politician, so I can't talk about it, but on a personal basis, I think some of it might have some negative consequences. Around the country, there are all kinds of things. This police brutality, you know, these people were claiming police brutality, African American men. I bet you I can ask, well, maybe not here, but asking African American men when I talk to them about police, You know, many of them, well, I was stopped here. You know, I wasn't doing anything. I was stopped over there. You know, that stuff needs to stop. That is targeting, and that's unfair. But there are a lot of things going on around the country that are taking place. Just open the newspaper. Say hello. Yes.
And Martin Luther King got the Peace Nobel Prize.
Yes, he did.
Did that
Yes.
have any effect in the United States, or was it a happening?
I don't know. I can't answer that. I don't know. I don't know what effect it had. I mean, it was a very positive thing. I'll tell you one thing. I'll share this with you. You didn't ask for this, but I'll share this with you. You know, I used to do a lot of work, and I'll share this. I want to share this. Just hold your question for a minute. I used to work with a group, and one of my colleagues, Val Batts, we would talk about, she wrote an article, and we would talk about things and how they became like they are. And we would talk about, it starts at the personal level, prejudice and bias. It starts at a personal level, and it is the maintenance of conscious or unconscious attitudes and feelings about differences. And so people have these personal values, and if they get these personal values inside you, and it can happen directly or indirectly. Direct way would be something happened to you and was caused by a person of another race, and you hold on to it and you say all of them are like that. Or indirectly, you know, you have kids, and kids watch you, and you act differently with a person, and you continue to act differently with people who look like that. Then they learn there must be something wrong with people like that. They hang on to these things, and so that stuff becomes part of you, and you don't know why. I mean, it just happens. And so we hang on to these values. So we really need to pay attention to what we do, and that's why I talked about love, because love is really important. So I just want to say that. Any other questions? Yes.
So I was curious what you thought about the march that just happened
In Washington, D.C.?
In light of your, what you shared with us about Dr. King's marches, it seemed to me he was very purposeful in what he was aiming for in terms of a result from a march. And I don't understand what was the purpose, the desired outcome from the march that just happened in Washington with all the women. It just seemed like there's too many things that are on people's minds right now. So I'd love your perspective on that. Am I hearing this correctly? And do you think you need to have a purpose in a march or a campaign in order to actually achieve some change?
I think, this is just my interpretation, I think that march was about solidarity for women. I think it was show solidarity. I think out of that march comes some great things. I mean, if you have that number of people coming together for whatever the purpose, whether it's multi-purposes, the thing about solidarity, and you can move forward with that solidarity and that energy that was there. So I don't know what I heard. There are a lot of little things. People had different things that they were, but the basic thing was to say, we don't agree with Donald Trump. And so, but I even look beyond that. I look at the solidarity. They were there as women saying, we are women. I read some of the signs, and they said, we need to be counted. I mean, the signs were clear, but just coming together, I think that was an important part for me. So I guess in essence, I'm saying that
He was one of the most impactful organizers,
yes,
that we've seen in,
yes,
years.
yes.
Before. And I don't get what, I feel like you have to have a purpose. You have to have something that you're very specifically trying to change versus just a message of, we don't like you, Donald Trump. I mean, and those are going to be the people who didn't vote for him anyway. So whose mind was changed by that march?
Maybe someone else in here can help you with that. Is anybody can help her with that? Because my statement to you is I saw solidarity, and I see power in solidarity, no matter what the message is. When I saw that, I said, women, they want something. Women's rights, we've never seen that before, ever. That number of women coming together. And I hear what you're saying, I understand what you're saying. What is the purpose? What is the purpose? And I'm saying there maybe have been multi-purposes.
Well, I
But-
think there were, but it's almost like there's too many, like, like to actually get something to change.
Okay.
Like a law, like a voters' rights law, or,
Can I ask you a question? I have a question for you. Do you think that the women should have come together?
I think you should, they should because they can.
Okay,
And it's important,
okay.
right, that that you can march.
Here's what I would invite you to do, is to share that, your concern, with the organizers, because they're listed, the organizers. And I would also invite you to give them your vision for what they should do next. Do you see what I'm saying? Yes. And if it caused this much tension in you, you can use that tension to cause something else to happen. Remember what Dr. King said, you can cause that, but you have to do it and reach out to those women, those organizers, and say, I didn't understand what it was about. And I assume Dr. Peoples didn't understand what it was about, but I want to know, and this is what I am contributing to the march. I saw the solidarity. This is what I would like to see. Let's have another march. Remember I said in Albany, Dr. King's march, it didn't go anywhere, but they didn't stop. They went on. You follow me?
Yeah.
Does that help? Yes.
The question I have is living through the civil rights.
Sure.
And now I hear rappers.
Right.
And I hear them and the impact they have on our young people. And I'm saying, are they destroying what Dr. King is trying to establish? By using the N-word, by degrading women, are they destroying what Dr. King is about?
Thank you for that question. It's a twofold question, because in some corners, they're saying, well, we're exercising our freedom of speech, or whatever. Other sections of the community are saying, well, it's damaging the community, it's damaging these two things. I guess that's a very good question. It is, it really, and I'm gonna tell you, because you too are indirectly saying to me, why don't you do something to get these people to come together and talk? Because maybe there needs to be a conversation, because if you see that, and other people see that, and nobody's coming together, I'm sure Dr. King would have brought a group of people together. People need to come together to talk about that and really deal with that. And is it damaging to the community? I haven't taken a survey, but I know there's two sides to that. But I'm gonna keep that, I'm gonna hold on to that, because that's helpful to me. So I thank you for that. Yes?
The civil rights movement was really led by churches and clergy. Do you see any body who could take that position now with things that are going on like criminal justice and the evisceration of voting rights and all the things that healthcare that will probably come down? You talking about the women's march that had no sort of real focus, but some group that could have a focus that could actually change things, because it seems that marches and people do change things.
So your question,
The question is do you see anyone coming up who could do that, or any group who could do that? Because the churches really did it, I think, in the civil rights.
you know, you have a different thing going on right now. You have social media. It's a different time. Social media. Social media is you, me, everybody. I mean, you can put anything you want out there. I don't, when you ask, do I see one group? NACP is still trying to do their thing. Other groups are out there trying to do their thing. I don't see a leader like Dr. King that could galvanize all these groups and get them to work together. But there are groups out there, and there are people, independent individuals out there talking about this. But we need a leader. My belief is we need a leader who can bring these people together. Dr. King was so gifted. I mean, he was a gifted speaker. I was reading, 2,800 speeches. I mean, that is unbelievable. And folks, guess what? Let me ask this question. How long do you think Dr. King was in the civil rights movement? How long? I'm gonna throw out some numbers. 5 years. 10 years. 12 years. 20 years. 12 years. 12. Get an A. He said, yeah. Throw you that basketball. 12 years. Can you believe all that I talked about? Can you believe all that I talked about from Rosa Parks? 12 years, about 12, 13 years. To me, it's mind-boggling to read about Dr. King. So we need a strong leader, someone that can galvanize. And also, remember back then, no social media, right? Back then you had other leaders. I mean, there were other people out there, A. Philip Randolph and Ralph Abernathy and just a lot of people out there doing things. But Dr. King was so gifted. He was so gifted. Any other questions? Yes, hi. Hi.
Thank you for everything you said.
Sure, you're welcome.
You asked what is our personal and institutional, what might be our personal and institutional legacies following in Dr. King's shadow.
Sure.
Or that shadow light, I think.
Yes.
And I would ask that if, following on some of the comments from others earlier, one thing, if we would not allow ourselves to fall victim to stereotypes which continue. Because one of the things, as you said, Dr. King was able to bring people together. And one of the things that helps to bring people together is to get past stereotypes, because they inform us so strongly and so incorrectly very, very often. So with social media and all kinds of other things, and I won't go into social interaction theory, but I could, is that we need to talk to each other in different ways for longer periods than we perhaps are socialized to do. Because it's so very easy to stay within our own communities and within our own social groups.
Sure.
Right.
It is. And you know something else, it's very easy to talk anonymously. I mean, you don't have to see who, I mean, you can say anything. Social media, you can say, you're anonymous. But when you come together, face to face, and you're having these discussions and these arguments and whatever, it's a different thing. That's why I'm saying it has changed so much. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I actually had 3 questions, but this young man took one of my questions.
Well, I hope you don't have 2 more. I hope you don't have 2 more as tough as that one.
I have 2 maybe. What do you think, what is your view on the relationship between Dr. King and Malcolm X back in their days? And
Well, you know, I can answer that quickly. You know, Malcolm X was changing. And you know he had a meeting with Dr. King. He had a 2-hour meeting. No one knows what happened. But if you look at Malcolm X, and I started to talk about this, when you look at Malcolm X, he was shifting. He was shifting to a more, he was moving in that direction, nonviolent. But I think they were going in the same direction. There were a group of people. It was King, Malcolm X, Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy. You know, they were all going in that direction. So if that answers your question. Yes.
and then my last question would be, if Dr. King had lived another 30 plus years, how do you think he would perceive the Million Man March back in '95?
I think he would have liked it. I don't know. Dr. King had a lot of purpose. You know, excuse me, what is your name? What's your first name?
Taking notes.
What's your Margaret? Like as Margaret was saying, you know, Dr. King, you know, he liked purpose. He needs to know what you were doing, you know. And if the Million March had purpose and direction, yes, he would have loved it. And that's what she was saying about the Million Women March. I mean, it wasn't a million women, but the Women's March. I only give them a million. I'm getting like Trump now, a million. Yeah. Okay, all right. Okay. Does that answer your question? Anyone else? Yes.
I'm really interested in just how you saw history just elapse. I mean, the beginning of your time until now. And
Wow.
I wanted to know because we have...
When I was a little boy, when I got oh, let me say this to you all. You know what? This is the kindest campus. You know, everybody opens the door for you. So think back to my story. You know, I got bumped in the head up here. You know, they just open the door for you. You just walk through. It's great. It's great. People open doors.
They're sweet. And so we have like a conflict now this time in April. We have the older generation and
Yes.
the more recent
Yes.
my time
Mm-hmm.
generation. I wanted to know because you saw back in history, you've witnessed such things that we haven't got the privilege to or to witness.
Mm-hmm.
To value our time right now, what is like the advice, I believe, or the blueprint that you think we should follow? I mean, I understand Martin Luther King's blueprint, but what do you think is you should give us as advice to kind of break down, like my professor said, the stereotypes and just to move forward in a progressive society for our future?
Easy. It's easy.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. She said, what idea, what do I think younger people can do with, as a group today to break down stereotypes? Talk. Talk. People don't talk anymore. They don't know who each other, they don't know anything about each other. And you can make up stuff on it, talk, and become, you know, have a person in front of you, and just talk. Talk about yourself. Talk about your culture. Talk about your differences. Just talk, communicate. A lot of times we go on the basis of stereotypes. Getting back to what you're saying, we go on stereotypes. And you know what we do a lot of times? We do a thing called group think. One person group thinks that way. No, you have to be an individual. You have to begin to think for yourself, not as the group. So many people have gotten in trouble, particularly young people. I worked at a university for all those years, and I would see it all the time, being influenced because they had nothing else to hold on to. You know, people need to talk, come together and interact. So that's my prescription.
I just wanted to add, as you're saying, you know, talk, it's also important to listen.
It is important to listen. It is important to listen.
We're not really hearing each other.
You know, I know this is being videoed, but I'll just do it anyway. You know, usually when I do workshops and I have a person in the workshop who's contentious and challenging for no reason. I mean, if there's a reason, I can understand, but for no reason, they're just being obstinate. You know what I'll do in the middle of the workshop? I'll stop and I'll say, excuse me, can I do something with you? And I'll take 2 chairs and put them in front of each other. And I'll sit down and I'll have a conversation with that person, if they agree. And I'll talk about my perception, what I saw. And I'll say, you know, it appears to me that you don't like what I'm saying, and that's fine, but let's talk about it. And every time I've done that, the person in front of me will say, wow. If it's lunchtime, they'll say, can I go to lunch with you? If it's dinner, they'll say, can I go to dinner? And it opens up the communication. It's amazing. And a lot of times, what you can do one-on-one with a person is awesome. And you can change their views. You know, when you look at discrimination, people forget about elderly. They're discriminated against all the time. You talk to little kids, they think they're discriminated against all the time. You know, they're running around the airport yesterday screaming, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, your mom's going to get you. But it's about communication. It's about coming together and communicating, you know, and stop the stereotyping. People do that stereotyping all the time. And it comes from a place where it's not good, and it can't help you move forward. How many times have you seen a person, and I've heard this a lot, and they said, you're not like I thought you were. Or, she's not like she was. She's not like I thought she was. How did that happen? They came together, and they interacted, and they talked. I'm big on that, big on that. So you have an issue with me, talk to me, and we'll talk through it. And I might not like it, or you might not like it, but at least we're talking.
I have a question, but I just feel like I have to respond to the comments about the march this week.
Yeah, please.
You know, you have to remember it was started by one person who had no idea in a million years that it would have turned into what it did. And I think they made a lot of attempts to actually narrow it down, but as it got bigger, that just gets harder to do.
Sure.
I think the most critical thing that happened was a demonstration of the sense of urgency.
Sure.
We all sit around and wait until we come up with the perfect reasons to march, but people felt like they had a sense of urgency, and they were able to share that sense of urgency. And people are learning. They're learning how to talk to their Congress people, which, you know, there are little clips all over. But I think, in absence of, a very specific reason, people understand now. There's a sense of urgency. A lot of stuff happened this week. That was one of them. A lot of other stuff happened after that. More stuff, more demonstrations have to happen. Maybe smaller things have to happen. But one of the things is a group of former congressional staffers put together a document called Indivisible, which teaches people how to protest globally.
Yes.
And their whole thing is, you really can't write to somebody out of state and say, I don't like what you're doing.
Right.
You don't care. You don't vote for them. You need to work with your local representatives, and there's this whole movement. And one of the things that got spawned kind of before, during, after the march was that people are getting together in their local communities and learning how to challenge their officials.
Well, thank you for that, because, you talked about sense of urgency. I feel a sense of urgency now to go back and find out what the march was fully about, because I've been trying to write this presentation for the longest. But, I appreciate that, and thank you for saying that. Is that it? Yes, one more.
Time for one more. In today's political climate, you're definitely seeing uptick in marches and protests. And what I'm hearing from some people is that, we needed a figure like Donald Trump to kind of maybe spur that a little bit. And I guess my question is, can we excuse this divisiveness and this rhetoric if it spurs some type of possibly revolution? And is that the silver lining there? And shouldn't the fight for social justice be part of our everyday lives ongoing?
That's what that's the point I tried to make earlier. Yes, it should be part of our everyday. It's mine. I mean, that's how I live. I really live like that. I try to do things that are productive rather than destructive. And I leave, and here's an important piece, always leave an option for the other person to challenge your view. Because through that, you learn something. I know I do. I learn something. I don't care if you brought it about Trump again, but I don't care what Trump is saying. What is it in that I can use to further help people in the world? I mean, what is it that I can do? I mean, all the rhetoric, I just get beyond that. I like to look at what is it? What's going on out here that's tangible that I can work with? Anyway, thank you.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Peoples. I want to share with you, I had the opportunity along with Dr. Nakai this morning to meet Dr. Peoples for breakfast. And we alluded to how special this place is. And it was delightful to hear him reference that as he came to the microphone tonight. So we have done a wonderful job of welcoming a scholar, a leader, and a friend. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.